Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Redman and welcome to another episode of Pastor's Library. This is the channel where we discuss everything to do with theology books, perhaps books that have been on a reading list for a course you've been on or attending, or maybe a seminary course, maybe a bachelor's or master's degree in theology or biblical studies. Whatever it is, maybe you've just had your interest spiked by visiting your pastor and seeing in his office, or perhaps you have been looking in bookshops and have had your interest spiked there. Whatever it is, we try to comment on books that may help you, might direct you. You might listen to me and decide, well, I definitely don't want to waste my money on that book. Or on the other hand, you might say, I would never have thought of that, but I think I'm going to have a look now. So whatever it is, if you like what we have to say, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Remember to subscribe and click on the bell. That way you'll know whenever we release another episode of Pastor's Library. So today I want to talk about a small series of books which are more than interesting to me. And what I would like to say is I'm very fond of journals and journal articles. And I'm therefore very interested in books that are collections of journal articles, even if those articles were written particularly for the book. So my interest was spiked by this book, which came out in 2019. It's called The State of New Testament Studies, and it's edited by Scott McKnight and Nijay Gupta, both of whom are authors that I read regularly when I see them bringing something out. And to be honest with you, with either of these two, it's can you manage 6 months without there being something new, because they are continually creating material or editing other people's material into helpful books. So the State of New Testament Studies is subtitled A Survey of Recent Research. And this implies that this is a book that has got together things that would normally be in journals, things that are new and things that are worthwhile considering. And I love all of that stuff. So when this came out in 2019 with its 496 pages, I was very interested by the list of contributors, of which there are 23 different contributors. There are chapters on most of the New Testament books. There are chapters on Jesus, on Paul, on New Testament theology, on ancient context and interpretation, all of which are items that would spike my interest. And the truth is, these are probably, most of them 20 pages. This is the sort of thing you can sit down after dinner, read a chapter of, and mull it over overnight before you go any further. It's small bite size, which is why I suppose I love journals. You don't have to read a novel-sized piece of work. You don't have to read a whole book. You can just read an article and mull it over. So I do think this is actually a great book. For example, Lynn Cohick has a chapter on women in Jewish, Greco-Roman and the early Christian world. Matthew Bates, another popular person at the moment, he has an article on the Old Testament in the New Testament. Michael Gorman has probably the article that I read first, I think, in this, Perspectives on Paul and Perennial Issues of Subjects in Their Definitions. And he goes into a lot of detail. He's not particularly bashing one perspective or another, but he's just putting them all out on the table and particularly moving further than those perspectives into the perennial issues that keep coming up in Pauline studies. Patrick Mitchell has an article on eschatology in the New Testament, which is very interesting. Nijay Gupta has an article on New Testament ethics. I have to say I was sucked in by that one very quickly. He goes into a number of other books on New Testament ethics, particularly citing Victor Furnish and Richard Hayes for their great contributions. And of course, Scott McKnight deals with the book of Romans. He has a lot to say about that, raising the issues that you would probably expect. So this one, which is getting a little bit thumbed, I would suggest to you is a really excellent book. And how can you not have something of interest in the state of New Testament studies? That is, of course, unless you're an Old Testament guy. This came out this year, 2024, 485 pages. It's in the same series by Baker Academic, and it's called The State of Old Testament Studies. You can tell by the font it's in the same series, and this is subtitled again, A Survey of Recent Research. Unlike the last one, this is edited by H. Hardy II and M. Daniel Carroll. This has got its endorsements mainly from Old Testament theologians, as you would expect. This has 34 contributors in its 485 pages, and it deals with the literature of the Old Testament, ancient linguistic and cultural concerns, interpretive approaches. It deals with the broad bands of the Old Testament literature, and you will see that it deals with the Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah and Esther, the Psalms, wisdom literature, prophetic literature, the major prophets and the minor prophets, and apocalyptic literature too. It also goes into interpretive approaches, studies of ideology, environmental approaches, Old Testament ethics, gender and sexuality, inner biblical exegesis, literary approaches, migration studies, reading in context, social scientific approaches, a theological interpretation, and an overall view of Old Testament theology. These are all really excellent. I was drawn in first of all by Lamb's section on making sense of a violent God, ancient Near Eastern religions, Dead Sea Scrolls, scribal practices. I also was interested in Kenneth Ristow's section on Chronicles, which he describes as a vital and important text. And Will Kynes has this section on wisdom literature, where he describes Job as being a book of multiple genres, which he lists as wisdom, prophecy, psalm, drama, contest, lament, theodicy, history, and allegory. These are all valid and interpretive and excellent. I loved that chapter. And Stephen Cook has this chapter on apocalyptic literature. So that's the sort of things you get from this. Now, as someone who leans to a New Testament interest, I don't buy quite as much Old Testament material, but I have to say I've loved this. I really have. I suppose I'd go so far as to say this is a great Old Testament book to buy for New Testament guys like me. There you go. And then they brought out a third one this year as well. In 2024, 346 pages on the state of Pauline studies. Again, same font, same publisher, Baker Academic, same subtitle, a survey of recent research. And again, this time, Nijay Gupta and Scott McKnight are back as editors, but also with Erin Heim. So this has got 17 contributors. Each of the Pauline letters has got a chapter. There's chapters on the Messiah, on Judaism, on salvation, the Spirit, on gender, on empire, feminist, post-colonial and womanist approaches. I had to read that to find out what a womanist approach was, because I couldn't quite see the difference between it and feminist until I'd read that chapter. So there you go, there's a tip for you. Gupta has a great chapter on Philippians, where he deals with the world behind Philippians and the world of the epistle to the Philippians. McKnight deals with Colossians. Oropesa deals with 2 Corinthians. These are all quite outstanding. Dennis Edwards deals with Philemon. Now, lately I have been reading as much as I could about Philemon because I think sometimes it can all just be written off to a modern interpretation of slavery. But here he discusses whether Paul is really talking about social justice or faith in the Word of God. And when I read that out, yes, I want to go read that. So that was also an excellent one for me. I have to say, these 3 books, I don't know if there will be anything else, can't quite think what it would be, but these 3 books have been helpful to me. I would suggest to you, these are great at seeing what's out there in the world of theological journal writing, and are an absolute wonderful collection of material for enhancing your library and enhancing your input, maybe even into essays that you might be doing for something. This is really good. I mean, I was looking at this and I was thinking, oh, if I'd have had this book when I was doing my master's degree, I would have quoted from, you get the gist, don't you? This is a really excellent collection of 3 books. So that's what I have to say for you for this week. I hope that you're interested. If you have liked what I said, please leave me a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't done, because it makes such a difference for our dear algorithm whom we love. And I just want to say, if you have any comments or is anything you particularly like me to cover, why not leave a message below? Because I do try to get back to everybody within a couple of weeks. So until next time, folks, all I've got to say to you is bye.